Welcome back, everyone. So we've finally reached part 8, the Abbasids. The progenitor of the Abbasid dynasty, which includes the family tree of Prophet Muhammad of the tradition of Ali, of Az-Zubair, Al-Abbas, and Abu Lahab, is presented in the Muslim storytelling as yet another Moses. The following short text tells the attentive reader everything that ever needs to be known about Muslim tradition. It needs to be read carefully and with attention to the smallest detail and its intricate logic. So no rush, pause, reflect. It is worth an Iranian university degree packed in under 5 minutes. So this is a passage from the standard Islamic narrative, as it were. And it's got all the features of your typical standard Islamic narrative. It's actually quite crazy, really, when you think about it. Um, no sane person could come up with this and be serious about it, could they? It does suggest that someone is having us on here. So here it is. There's the reference to it. It's by Muhammad ibn Sa'd, whoever that is. Should be pointed out that it has a Jewish equivalent, which is Sad also. So you could have Bar Sad. So it could be just an Arabized version of a Jewish name. It is called Kitab al-Tabakat al-Kabir. I would strongly suggest that this person, known as Muhammad ibn Sa'd, is probably Jewish, probably working within one of the academies and has been tasked with basically writing this nonsense. That's definitely what AJ Juice is suggesting here. So without further ado, let's have a look at it. The Zamzam was a spring of Allah which was shown to him in dream several times, and he was ordered to dig Teba, the place shown to him. Thereupon he asked, "What is Teba?" Next night he again had a dream, and he was commanded to dig Bara. He asked, "What is Bara?" The next night, when he was sleeping in his bedroom, he again dreamt that he was commanded to dig Al-Madnuna. He again asked, "What is Al-Madnuna?" "Please explain to me what you say." The following night he dreamt that he was ordered to dig the Zamzam. Thereupon he asked, "What is the Zamzam?" He, the angel, said, "It will not exhaust, nor will it be disliked. The pilgrims will drink water out of it, and that spring is hidden between feces and blood, close to the place where a crow of red beak and claws pecks." Sounds like perfect place to have a spring, really, doesn't it? This is Allah's recommendation according to this story, right? He, Muhammad ibn Umar, said, "The crow with red beak and claws never left the place of slaughtering, close to the place of feces and blood." Abdallah Muttalib heard the angel say, "It would be a source of water supply for you and your descendants after you." Yeah, it's just the sort of place you want to go and get a cup of water, isn't it? Now, A.J. Juice wrote another paper called The Ants Moved to Ramla, and he focused on the word altari, which appears in the Quran. And this is a typical Talmudic style wordplay. So what he says, and this will become clearer when we think about this red-beaked crows that are referred to in the story. This is going to be more obvious. He says the Altari appears to be an allied group that is akin to raptorial birds, vultures, perhaps ravens, or simpler crows. It is a Talmud-style wordplay, likely on the Tayaye, the Jewish tribal alliance that settled between the Gassanids and Nestorian Lakhmids. So in this story, you have this well which is polluted with feces and blood, and who are attending to it but these crows, these red-blooded crows. There's blood on their beaks. These red-beaked crows. And so, who are the carcasses that these crows are feasting on? But the Arabs. That's what the story is telling us, actually. But who would have worked that out? Only a fellow Talmud expert could have worked that one out. So this is a bit of a joke at the Arabs' expense between the Jewish leaders here in this story. While the writer of the story depicts himself as a crow, The vulture. His name sounds innocuous, sad, which in Arabic means friend. But if you look at it in Hebrew, it actually is he hunted. So his name, Ibn Sad, actually means the son of the hunter, which is spot on in terms of the meaning of the story, if we think of it in a Talmudic symbolic way. Um, so you really have to suspend your disbelief here. But notice that some of the features here, the irrelevant and boring repetition, um, the reference to Zamzam, which is actually, as we know now, is a doubling up of the Zoroastrian demon or god called Zam. So obviously, it kind of tells you something about the person coming up with this. He, Muhammad ibn Umar, said, next morning Abdul al-Muttalib went with his pickaxe and shovel, along with his son al-Harith ibn Abdallah Muttalib, and at that time he had no other son except him. See all the irrelevant details that's going along with this. Then Abdullah Muttalib began to dig with his pickaxe, filling the earth in a vessel with the shovel, and al-Harith took it to throw it away. He dug it for 3 days, after which he found the traces of the well. He said, Allah is great, Allahu Akbar, and the traces were of the spring of Ishmael. The Quraysh knew that he, Abdul al-Muttalib, had succeeded in reaching the water level. Thereupon they came to him and said, let us be your partners. He said, I'm not going to do this because I have been specially ordered to dig it, and if you like, you may appoint an arbitrator. They said, Huthaim, the sorceress of Banu Sa'd, will arbitrate. They set out towards her. Abdullah Muttalib was accompanied by 20 persons of the Banu Abd Manaf, and the Quraysh had 20 men of their tribes. When on the way to Syria, they reached Al-Fakir or Hadwa. Their stock of water was exhausted, and they were thirsty. Notice they're adding lots of uncertainties and extra details as if each point is hugely important. Thereupon they said to Abdal Muttalib, what do you think? He replied, it means sure death. Let every one of us dig a pit for himself, so that whenever a man expires, others will bury him, till the last man may die without burial. This will be an easy affair. Consequently, they dug pits and sat there awaiting death. Then Abdul Muttalib said, by Allah, to surrender ourselves to death would mean weakness. Let us go about in the world. It is likely that we might get water. So they departed, and Abdal Muttalib stood up to ride his steed, but suddenly he noticed a spring of sweet water gushing out of the earth from under the feet of his steed. On this, Abdal Muttalib said, Allah is great. His partisans also joined him in calling out, Allah is great, and all of them drank water. Then he called the people of the Kereshite tribes, come along and quench your thirst. Verily, Allah has bestowed water on us. They drank and made others drink. Thereupon they said, the matter has been decided. He who has bestowed water on you in this wilderness has also bestowed the well of Zamzam on you. By Allah, we will never dispute with you. Then he, as well as they, returned. They never went to the sorceress and withdrew their claim on Zamzam in his favor. All right, so what does AJ Juice make of it? He says, have you ever dug your own pit in dry sand during a near-death situation? Had I paraphrased the exhausting story, the reader would miss that only a Jewish Gaon can come up with such genius nonsense. They hold their readers for idiots, which they probably are for wasting their time, and were bunking on nobody being able to spot the Talmudic language. In fact, Islam is specifically designed to keep its disciples in intellectual and economical serfdom to their Jewish leaders. They feed them this stuff so they have no time to take on real-world challenges other than modifying toy drones into lethal weapons deployed against a people that never wasted a thought in harming them, or suicide vests. If Iran is good at one thing, it must be their ability to produce cheap, democratized killing machines. It fits their leader's mindset perfectly. So you can see it's just utter nonsense, the whole story. It's designed to dumb you down, confuse you, disorientate you with kind of the sort of slight sort of hint here and there might be something to the story, um, but the idea of digging a grave for yourself when you're dying of thirst is just silly. That's not what typically someone would even dream of doing. To add insult to injury, the tradition morphs Abdul al Muttalib's Moses with Abraham. When the people saw this find the well, they wanted to fight him. On this occasion, he made a vow to slaughter one of his sons if he begot 10. When 10 sons were born to him, he wanted to slaughter Abdul Allah, but the Banu Zura stopped him and said, "Cast a dice between Abdul Allah and the camels in such and such numbers." Accordingly, he cast a dice, which came out successively 7 times in favour of Abdul Allah and only one for the camels. He, Ibn Sa'd, said, "I do not know if the number 7 was mentioned by Abu Mijlaz or not. However, the affair was then settled. He let his son go and slaughtered the camels." Even the dumbest Muslim should be able to grasp that they have been had twice, first with the atrocious swindle of the Jewish Quran, and then with forged Jewish inverted commas Muslim traditions, wherein causes and actions are disjointed to the extreme and buried under truckloads of historically completely irrelevant narrations designed to exhaust the reader. The typical style of a hadith, for example, is episodic. It's split into episodes, all disjointed. So if you're aware of the book by Miguel de Cervantes called Don Quixote, he, among other things, is parodying the Muslim hadiths in the way he tells that story, and it is very repetitive and silly and all the rest of it. It's disjointed, episodic, and so forth. Okay, back to our story now. What is the significance for Muslims in which direction the fake prophet relieved himself? Is it good for an exam? It goes even lower than that. Those who think that Buhari might meet a higher bar know nothing about pain. Muslims were had 3 times, perhaps because the text conveniently makes the student believe that there was such a thing like a Zamzam well and a pagan place by the name of Mecca, perhaps the product of a much later wave of edits and fabrications. The least bright in class might not get it, and those who accept such worthless smear as history or need further elaboration on this text are beyond rescue. Any half-baked Jewish Talmudist would immediately recognize his father's hands, not the work of some illiterate desert dwellers, let alone pagans. This morass is almost comical, were it not so horribly tragic for modern Muslims and Jews. How much of it should we believe? Nothing at all that cannot be corroborated. That is, everything the student needs to know about Islamic tradition. Is that how little an Iranian university degree is worth? So I think probably the most important line today that we should take away from this is nothing can be trusted that cannot be corroborated. And like he's pointing out that the Zamzam is a fictional account. Now, when I looked at the Zamzam myself, what I found was its connection to Zoroastrianism. The word Zam is actually the name of one of its gods, angels, demons, depending on your point of view, which is suspect. Why would there be such a place down in the Hijaz? Well, if you are dealing with Gaonim who are writing this stuff, who are coming from a location where they're very familiar with Zoroastrianism, they can pull that stuff out of a hat and reproduce it and tell a ridiculous story. So I can totally get what A.J. Deus is on about. So everything needs to be corroborated. Now, in relation to that, I'm kind of taking a little diversion just to support the point just made. And this is my reaction. Should we believe that the Dome of the Rock inscriptions are genuinely from the 7th century? Despite attempts to debunk the Serpent King's evidence, some of which was successful, i.e. some of it was successfully debunked, the key point has been missed. No corroboration of the wording of the inscription has been given. None whatsoever. People overlook that. There's an awful lot of cheerleaders saying, well, hey, the whole thing was debunked, but they're missing the point. The most important point about A.J. Deus's paper is the fact that there is no corroborating evidence. All we have is trust. And as we've seen again and again, the Islamic narrative cannot be trusted because of what's going on. It's not the sort of situation where you can de facto just trust what is said. You have got to find evidence to back it up. Otherwise, you just have to put a big question mark over it. So, for example, no explanation has been given as to why the Crusaders referred to a completely different wording in relation to the inscription, i.e. a different wording at the Dome of the Rock in terms of the inscription, but make no mention of the most crucial historical text should it have existed. In other words, they could easily have quoted the inscription as we have it today, but they didn't, and referred to something completely different. So why did they ignore that? The explanation given by Thomas Alexander is, they couldn't speak Arabic, as if there were no Arabic-speaking Christians in Jerusalem, which is nonsense. It just doesn't work. So let's take a look at this here. You'll see a crown there on Matthias II of Hungary. It's a very distinctive crown, and you see it again on the right. Okay, and here we have it again. This is two photos there on the left hand side, the front and the back of the crown. Now, this crown is one of the most important relics, as it were, of the Hungarian royalty. It's 1,000 years old, as we'll see. Now, to have an image of it show up on the Dome of the Rock mosaics should raise suspicions that these mosaics are from the 16th century. So that figure 6 there, and I have coloured in it on the right so you can see it a bit more clearly. There's a definite nod to this crown given there. It has all the features. This in the context of Caliph Suleiman's gloating on the mosaics of his successes in Eastern Europe. We can see here from a list of campaigns that Suleiman did that Hungary was very much in his sights, but actually we can look at his own words in an inscription to see that he has the Hungarian crown in his mind. This is from 1537 on the citadel of Binder, Moldova. I am the Sultan who took the crown and throne of Hungary. So it isn't too far of a stretch to suggest that he put the symbol of the Hungarian crown in the Dome of the Rock in the 16th century, because that's what we see there. This is all found on the mosaics, which are obviously these mosaics where he's talking about his victories and so forth, are clearly 16th century. But these are paralleled with the crown of his chief opponent, Charles V, that accompanies the supposed 7th century inscriptions. Do you see the problem? You look at the mosaics, you look at the inscriptions, and they look from the same era. There's no sense that the 7th century supposed inscriptions are looking a bit worn in comparison to the 16th century mosaics. They look exactly from the same period. But that doesn't seem to bother some people. Now, we take this detail from A.J. Deus's paper of page 123 of the Serpent King. We'll come back to the other paper in a second. From 1545 to 66 AD, the Dome of the Rock undergoes significant restorations during which today's exterior mosaics are attached in a mixture of Mamluk traditions and Ottoman ceramic techniques. So note that the year these mosaics were happening, the Dome of the Rock. The inscription embroidered onto the coronation mantle indicates with all certainty, so this is in relation to the Hungarian crown, that István I and Queen Gisela had it made in 1031. Okay, so that's a little bit after the 7th century. It's kind of important. The oldest authentic representation of the Holy Crown is from 1555, which is the image we have there on the right. The crown depicted in the Fugger Chronicle. Okay, all images of the crown before the mid 17th century show the cross in its original upright position, and then later it must have got damaged because it gets crooked. So you can see clearly you have the crown. This was published in this chronicle, okay, which would allow us the assumption that should the mosaic makers in the Dome of the Rock wanted to imitate this, they could do a pastiche, a caricature of this crown in this mosaic that they have, and you can see everything from the hanging jewels underneath, the square sections, followed by the alternating semicircle and diamonds. These are very clearly from this most famous crown, the Hungarian crown. Just so we're clear, this is at a time when Caliph Suleiman, who had ordered these mosaics to be done in the 16th century in the Dome of the Rock, was battling this very king. Okay, so it's not like I'm making an outlandish statement here. The idea was that by putting this up, he was demonstrating his victory over his opponent. Considering the works were done from 1545 to 1566, the Fugger Chronicle, published in 1555, would have provided the necessary knowledge to complete a pastiche of the Hungarian crown. So back to Iran's poison arrows, and we're at page 50 of the paper. How is it even possible that such a grand lie could have prevailed for so long? There is a more complicated answer to that. For now, a simplistic one is this. The leaders of the only group that was not only highly educated but was also cooperating on a global scale, the leaders of the Jewish diaspora. In light of this, how do we turn the page on the transition from the Umayyads to the Abbasids? So, just so we're clear, he is laying responsibility for the creation of the standard Islamic narrative with the leaders of the Jewish diaspora. Now he's moving to the key question, the transition from the Umayyads to the Abbasids. When the Tayaye envoys arrived at the court in China during the 720s or 730s, they refused to prostrate in front of the emperor because they only prostrated before their god. Okay, obviously that wasn't a full story. Let's just have a look at what the Chinese tell us. However, the government officials this time criticized the Dashi invoice privilege and demanded them to do the prostration as required according to the Tang custom. The Dashi invoice succumbed and did the prostration. Okay, so they did actually give in, so that, given the need, they will break their own religious rules, as you can see. The invoice fed the Chinese court with their own version of how things unfolded, unverifiable for them. According to the Tayaye invoice, the beginning of the story has its root with the Guli tribe, which was divided into two families, Penny Shi Shen and Penny Mo Huan, which is Hisham and Marwan, with Muhammad coming from Hisham as Ahmad, Mokimo, or Makamat. They passed over the Sufyanid period not by chance, but also provide for another clue in the ongoing shaping of the communal memory, Guli. This seems to be a reference to the Holy Marzutran lineage going back to the 3rd century Ghalib ibn Fir and beyond. That gets us to the point in this version where the Hisham and Marwan branches split at Abd Manaf al-Mukhira ibn Qusay, himself head of the House of Assembly, the Sanhedrin. While we are in full-on territory of proto-tradition, it is a different tradition, but Jewish-made tradition nonetheless, because the split is much more recent. So this Abd Manaf ibn Qusay, who was he according to the Sen? Well, according to the Sen, he was the great-great-grandfather of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, okay, and born in 430, which is um, basically just a fictional account. Contrary to that tradition, Yazid III did not die from a brain tumor, but from brain injury inflicted by Marwan II, who then moved the capital from Damascus to Haran. It was this killing of the Alid lineage, so the Chinese annals, that sparked Abu Muslim's Abbasid revolt from Merv and the installment of the Hasmonean Hashemite As-Safa to the throne, in the Chinese court presented as Abu al-Abbas. He was succeeded by al-Mansur, while Abu Muslim and his Alid followers were betrayed. He was treated like a god. Even today, Afghan Muslims consider Abu Muslim the father of Islam. The Marwans were Tayaye in white robes, and the Abbasids were Tayaye in black robes. Both were Tayaye. The Poshi Persians lived on. These are decisive distinctions between the Chinese and Muslim sources. If Marwanids and Abbasids were both Tayaye, what changed? The 14th century Muslim scholar Khaldun explains, when the Hashemites divided into factions and the Alids, descendants of Abu Talib, went against the Abbasids on every possible occasion, they wanted to differ from them in the colour of their flag, so they used white flags. Therefore, they were called the White Ones. White was used by the Alids throughout the reign of the Ubaydid, the Fatimids. It was also used by the Alids who succeeded at that time in the east, such as the Zaydi missionaries in Tabaristan and in Sada in the Yemen, and those other Alids who made propaganda for the extremist Shia, such as the Karmatians. When al-Mamun gave up wearing black and using the black insignia of his dynasty, he turned to green and used green flags. According to tradition, the change to green occurred under al-Mamun in 819 AD, with nothing to ponder at this time other than taking a mental note that there might be another split in the dynasty. The Marwanids were Alids. While it is an important clue, it is not as clear-cut as the late Chinese sources report from an Abbasid perspective. The Umayyad lineage is in such chaos with factions constantly dethroning each other that a clean lineage tree is hard to reconstruct. Hard, not impossible, not here. Something else changed. Jan Retzo, in his book The Arabs in Antiquity, Their History from the Assyrians to the Umayyads, summarizes how outside sources display a change in perception. During the last decades of the Umayyad dynasty, the term Arabs used for the Muslims began to appear in Greco-Latin texts. The earliest occurrence seems to be from the late 7th century in works originating from Anastasius of Sinai, where the Muslims are twice called Arabs. John of Damascus, who died in 750, still calls them Ishmaelites and Saracens and does not use Arabs, but his contemporary Johannes Monachus, writing in the reign of Hisham, 724 to 743, calls them godless Arabs. In the historical work Continuatio Byzantia Arabica, originally written in Syria, ending with the year 741, the Muslims are called Saraceni, but in the continuation of this work, the Continuatio Hispanica, written under the Umayyads in Spain, ending with the year AD 754, The Muslims have become Arabs. The Continuatio Byzantia mentions Arabs only once when telling about the accession of the Caliph Suleiman in AD 715. Interestingly enough, Johannes Monachus also calls Suleiman the tyrant of the godless Arabs. Indeed, when we get to Spain, we encounter Saracens transitioning to being Arabs also, as though there were two distinct Jewish groups. Arabs are split in two branches of Saracens, and Saracens are by definition Abrahamic, i.e., Jewish. Marwan II was a man of unclear provenance, and by a father named Muhammad. He was a professional politician who had been governor of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and northern Mesopotamia since 732 AD, having outmaneuvered the so-called rightful heir. According to tradition, Marwan was determined to sustain uninterrupted Umayyad rule, and in his capacity, he seems to have put the Khazar ruler to flight. However, resistance came from across the Caliphate. Marwan resorted to force, but finally met the sword in 750 AD. His doom may have been accelerated by a cataclysmic earthquake in January 749 AD that struck the Levant and claimed tens of thousands of lives in Jerusalem alone. My totally unfounded hunch is that the earthquakes led to the destruction of the mount housing the originally mentioned black stone and its disappearance into the sea, thus undermining their symbol of an altogether non-existent divine legitimacy. Neither do the Alids have any legitimacy other than through organized crime. His heirs, Ubaydallah and Abdallah, had fled to Ethiopia. Most of the Umayyad leadership found a brutal end in what turned out to be another civil war, all according to tradition. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine immediately leveraged on the Caliphate's weakness and went into the offensive to conquer Syria and Cyprus. He later tried to regain territories in Bulgaria as well. However, the Byzantine conquests were not stable and only marked a temporary revival before the Byzantines and the Papal States had been too weak for successful military operations, despite an eternally quarrelling caliphate. So here is the Khazar Haganate 650 to 850. Events happened quickly at the beginning of Abbasid rule. Kufa was the first capital from 750 to 762, and then Al-Rumiyya in 762 AD, which I presume identical with Mahose. Precisely during this time, we have a prisoner returning to China in 762 AD from Mesopotamia. He is another star witness. At the time, the capital was at Kufa, and the Arab king was still going by Mu'min al-Mu'minin rather than his real name. They prayed 5 times a day and prohibited the drinking of wine and music. All women had to cover their faces. There was a huge ceremonial hall at Kufa that accommodated tens of thousands of worshippers, in which the king preached from a pulpit every seventh day. He said, "Human life is very difficult. The path of righteousness is not easy, and adultery is wrong. To rob or steal in the slightest way, to deceive people with words, to make oneself secure by endangering others, to cheat the poor or oppress the lowly, there is no sin greater than one of these. All who are killed in battle against the enemies will achieve paradise. Kill the enemies, and you will receive happiness beyond measure." Here comes the religion of peace at last, peace through jihad. The people all suffer from malaria and dysentery. In the space of a year, 5 out of 10 die. That perhaps explains their militant insanity. And so here is the relevant passage there. They subjugate everything and everyone, but in unexpected ways. The fun comes to an abrupt stop. We should rather look away. Today the Arabs have absorbed 40 or 50 countries. all of them reduced to subjugation. The Arabs parceling out their troops so as to secure the territory all the way to the Western Ocean. It is also said that Zarang is over 700 leagues southwest of Amul. Those Persians whose surname is Chu are from this country. Their city is 15 leagues square, and they have used it to make the gates of their city. In the city, there are salt ponds and also two Buddhist establishments. What is he talking about? Saranj? Saranj? Okay. That must be a mistake. It just so happens to be where the Tang had settled Emperor Peroz, the last ruler of the Sassanid Empire. It is not only a surprise, but tells us much more than we dare to know. As inadmissible as mosque orientations as evidence are, here we have a possible answer why the southeastern part of Iran appears almost untouched by mosques pointing towards either Baghdad, Narbonne, or Girona. The Sassanids never quit. And what we should not dare to know is in their surname. Chew. Read this as chew, like chewing gum. A phonetic Jew? What are we looking at here? Was Sasanian royalty involved during the time of the Rashidun Caliphate? Not now, sorry. So, in other words, AJ Juice is not going to deal with that just at the minute. However, coins indicate that Abdul Allah ibn al Zubair, aka Ali, was pushed back towards Kerman 688 AD and Karanj 690 AD by Abdul al Malik. Does Saranj show in mosque orientations? Who wants to know? They are inadmissible as evidence. Modern methods cannot be applied to medieval mosque orientations. Their obsession with mosque orientations is historically priceless. It is going to be part of a greater analysis about Mecca. For now, of course, it shows. A preliminary survey brought forth over 24 such mosques, and it does so also in mosques that show layers to Narbonne, Girona, or Baghdad. But because we do not know where exactly in Zaranj, the center of the Parthian Suran dynasty, the leaders might have been situated, it is not as simple as one might hope. In addition, almost the entire village around the fortification in the north of modern Zaranj, where Peroz allegedly took a stand against the Arabs, appears to be orientated towards Aksum and Negash in Ethiopia. Hence, it takes much deeper analysis to answer the question satisfactorily. You did not happen to think that the survey left out fire temples. It shows there as well, albeit statistically irrelevant, the reasons of which we should now be able to imagine. So there is Saranj, just in case you're unaware. It is much more interesting that, from a Chinese perspective, the invaders come along with the Muslim calendar year. It is their custom to take the fifth month as the beginning of the year. Every year they give each other gifts of painted jars. There is a bath festival and a swing festival. The Arab governor of the Eastern Marches resides here, and from here all the way to the Persian Gulf, Arabs and Persians dwell mixed together. As to their customs, they worship heaven and do not eat the meat of animals dead of natural causes or meat kept overnight. They smear their hair with fragrant oil. Muslim customs are intermixed with Jewish traditions. It gives us a glimpse into whom we are dealing with. The Abbasid al-Mansur moved the capital to Pumbedita, Baghdad, and called it Medinat al-Salam. Medina, mind you. That he called Baghdad City of Peace is a distinct marker that it is here that Islam entered the post-apocalyptic era of the New Jerusalem. Victory, yes, that victory. Peace in the biblical understanding means that all were united in a new covenant under the God of the Israelites, represented by the Jewish Marzutran house of Joseph, and were governed by the Jewish house of David. Islamic Baghdad was the Jewish New Jerusalem. The new covenant does not end here, it begins here. And that ends this part of the series. In the next part, we will look at the origin of the Sunni-Shiite split. So we'll see you very soon. All the best. Bye bye.